The very first European to live in the Jimboomba area arrived in 1845. At the time, Queensland didn't exist. It didn't become a separate colony until 1859. Therefore, welcome to Jimboomba, New South Wales. So before we jump into the European history of Jimboomba, we should take a look at what the name means. And there's a few different theories as to the origin of the name Jimboomba. Now, it was originally spelt with a G, though I think it was still pronounced as Jimboomba rather than Gimboomba. In terms of the origin of the name, the first theory is that it is the local indigenous word for thunder but little rain. Another interpretation is that it means an edible grub. Mr. Lewis Strachan, one of the very first European settlers here, says that the name Jimboomba means a place where water overflows, as in the Logan River overflowing in heavy rain. But there is also another idea. Whenever the name came up, it always seemed to indicate a very loud noise. The story as written down was that noise was so intense, was so incredible, that it scared the heck out of them. They ran and hid until they felt safe to come out. Now, when this occurred, we don't know. It could have been 200 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. What I think it might be, and this is merely supposition, it could very well have been a meteor exploding in the atmosphere. And that does happen. It's not, I mean, it doesn't happen every day, but it's possible that that's what it was. Before European settlement, Jimboomba was known as a place of hoop pines. There were vast hoop pine forests here, and the timber getters would cut those trees, float them down the Logan River, out into Moreton Bay and up to Brisbane for processing in sawmills, and then some of them were shipped to Sydney. There was so much hoop pine forestry here in Jimboomba that virtually all trace of those hoop pine forests are now gone. The landscape that you see around me today is the product of a lot of intense forestry which just leaves the dry open bushland. This is not what it originally looked like. It was a much cooler, much darker, kind of almost rainforesty feeling around here. This is a much drier environment now. Where I'm walking right now was known as the Jimboomba Run. This was a huge 12,800 acre grazing bit of land taken up by a guy called Thomas Dowse in 1845. And to put that into some perspective, Brisbane was only settled in 1825, so this is only 20 years after the establishment of the Moreton Bay Penal Settlement. Now, there is an old map of the area, and it does show Dowse, at least it looks like his name listed here. This is 1846. Dowse himself didn't actually use this land for too long. He had a lot of trouble just with business affairs. There were some apparently clashes with the local indigenous people. In 1848, the lease on this run was handed over to a guy named Robert Rowlands. He is described as being a publican from Sydney, though there is no actual information to support that. But then he too wasn't here all that long, because in 1851, the lease was transferred to a man named Henderson. Now, unlike Dowse and Rowlands before him, Andrew Henderson made a success of this place, and he put his own stamp on it by building a house, and that house is just up ahead of me there. It's today known as Jimboomba House and Restaurant, and it has the distinction of being, according to most, the second oldest house in Queensland, the oldest one being Newstead House. And here it is, Jimboomba House. Now, it wasn't originally on this spot here. It was about a kilometre further to the west. It was moved here, I think, in the 1980s. It was built from rough-hewn red cedar. I don't know how much of the original house still exists. Obviously, it's been changed and adapted and altered over the years. But there are elements within the house, probably quite a lot. I'd love to go and see it, but they're closed at the moment, that the original 1851 house. Now, it is reported that Henderson and his brother James herded their sheep all the way from Bathurst up here to the Jimboomba Run. In 1859, when Queensland separated from New South Wales, the Queensland colonial government had a little bit of a problem. They had this vast stretch of country, and yet there weren't very many people here. And one of their first targets were the huge grazing leases. They targeted places like the Jimboomba Run because it was just too big, and you could get a lot more farms and a lot more people and a lot more productivity happening here. Mount Lindesay Highway. No one really knows when this road was first put through. We do know it was in existence by the early 1860s because in 1863 the mail run from Brisbane down to Casino in northern New South Wales came through here. In fact, Jimboomba House was an important stopover for the mail run. In 1866, the Cobb & Co coach company took over the mail run, and they would also stop at Jimboomba House as well. Collect mail, drop off mail, parcels, passengers could get on and off, the horses could be watered. It could very well be an old timber getters track, and that would place it in the 1840s, but it may also be an Indigenous track originally. In 1875, the very first hotel opened here in Jimboomba, and it was known as the Norfolk Hotel. Unfortunately, nobody knows where the hotel was built. It is quite possible that it was built just across the road there at the Colonial Village, what we now know as the Colonial Village. Later it became the Travellers Rest Hotel. But this was all before the train station was built, and that occurred in 1888. And once that happened, Jimboomba was changed forever. And this is it. This is the site of the old Jimboomba train station. It opened in 1888 as a single track from Bethania down to Bow Desert. Carried passengers, but it mainly also carried cattle and goods and cargo and timber and mail, all that sort of thing. So as a result of the train station opening in 1888, businesses began to appear here. First of all, you had the post office. Now that was originally at Jimboomba House. That was moved here to the train station. That was very common in the 19th century. The post office would be located at the station. Same at Kingston Station. So the post office came here. There was also a sawmill just nearby. And across the road there on Cross Street, a general store was built, and a little bit later on a petrol pump, and also a little bit later on a telephone was placed, a public telephone here at the train station. What this all means is the emphasis of Jimboomba shifted from up there, up on the main road on Mount Lindesay Highway, down to here. This became Jimboomba. And if you look on maps from the 1890s, 1900s, the 20s and the 30s, this is where all the activity is. This is the subdivisions. Right here was Jimboomba. And just around the corner from the train station is, I believe, the old station master's house. Quite a history about the old house there. It wasn't originally there. It wasn't the original Jimboomba train station master's house. That came from Mundoolan, I think, or did she say it was Bow Desert? Anyway, it wasn't originally there. It's been there for just over 50 years. Val has said that further down the track here, there is an old switch, track switch. So since I'm in the area, I'm going to go see if I can find it. This is the Railway Hotel. It was opened in 1888, same year as the Jimboomba train station, and it's looked different over the years. is the earliest photo we've got of it. You can see the changes. And eventually went up for auction in the 1970s. But it's still here today, and now Jimboomba Tavern. What do they actually call it? There's a sign here. Jimboomba Country Tavern. So that's the actual name. Up here where I am now is Jimboomba State School. This was originally the Jimboomba Provisional School. It was opened in 1890. So why is it called a provisional school? Well, a provisional school was a school that was funded by the local residents. So in the 19th century, the farmers and the families and whatnot in the district would pool their resources to pay for the construction of a schoolroom and employ a teacher. So it became known as a provisional school. And then over time, if the school looked like it was going to be a success and the community was growing, the local government would then step in, or the colonial government at the time would step in, and they would take over the funding of the school, and then that would make it a state school. So Jimboomba Provisional School eventually became Jimboomba State School. And the school got some pretty good real estate here. They're at one of the highest points in Jimboomba. Although I think there's some people over on Spring Street who are maybe a little bit higher at the moment. And I'm just near the school, that's on that side there, the tavern is over there, and in the distance I can see Flinders Peak. Wow. The Little Brown Church. This was built in 1912 and was first established over on Mary Street. It was an interdenominational church. It was moved here and reopened as a Rotary venue in 2001. Wow. Beautiful, simple little country church. Found a very interesting aerial photograph of Jimboomba taken in 1944. Check out just how denuded the area is of tree cover. It's almost completely barren. And there's also not a lot happening on the ground either. There's very little settlement going on at Jimboomba. It really is a very quiet, remote, rural community. And things didn't really change that much for a long time. In fact, they seem to have gotten a little bit quieter. And what I mean is that the main news story for 1952 concerning Jimboomba was the story of a horse being driven by Mrs. Turner on the main road, and the horse was startled by a paper bag. Apparently the said paper bag startled the horse so much that it reared up, and Mrs. Turner's two children in the sulky were thrown to the floor, one of whom broke her tooth. I'm not making fun or anything. It just shows that how quiet the place was, and that even the story of a horse being frightened by a paper bag was considered newsworthy. And you know, things pretty much stayed the same until the mid-1980s. And what happened in 1985 is just ahead of me. The first shopping centre in Jimboomba opened in 1985 at a cost of about $750,000. Of course, it's been added to many times over the years and expanding and growing. Looks great. And across the road now you've got Coles as well. So that was 1985. Also in 1985 the hall was moved. Right, the Community and District Hall. This was originally built in 1930 over near the train station. Some years later it was then moved up onto Mount Lindesay Highway next to the Jimboomba State School. In 1952 it caught fire and was severely damaged. It was rebuilt in 1953. That's why it says 1953 on it. And then in 1985 it was moved down here to Honora Street. Just over that way there is Cusack Lane, and that's the bridge over the Logan River. But down here, at the end of this little road I'm walking on, this was the very first bridge over the Logan River at Jimboomba. It really is quite steep down here. This is literally where cars and traffic would come down to go over the little bridge down here. One of those little wooden bridges, not very wide. Right, location of the original bridge. There were some fishermen down there. I didn't want to disturb them with them and their mullets. I mean the fish, not their hairstyles. Jimboomba train station closed in 1996, though the line stayed in use and was mainly used for shipping cattle. Sometime later, I think it was in 2003, the line was reopened as a heritage line. But it didn't last too long. There was a derailment somewhere south of Bethania. And also it didn't help that a local in the area decided to burn down one of the bridges. And that was it. The line closed permanently. And this section, at least here, has been reopened as a walking trail. In fact, I think there are still plans to create more of an ongoing trail linking Yarrabilba down to Bow Desert. Just across the road from the Jimboomba Tavern is what's known as Colonial Village. And there they are. These old houses all put together. They were moved here from 1997 until 2000. That's when it was all finished. And they come from different places. One comes from Ipswich, one's from Clayfield, one's from Auchenflower. And they're all set up here, all on the same level. And I think they look wonderful. They look like they've been there for over 100 years, but it's only been about 20-25 years that they've actually been there. I'm going to go and have a look. It was in 2008 that Jimboomba became part of Logan City Council, and then in 2017 places like Flagstone and Glen Logan were removed from Jimboomba to become a new locality. And today the area is growing. More housing estates, I think they're widening the Mount Lindesay Highway here, more shops, more shopping centres. Now when I began this video I really didn't know anything at all about Jimboomba. I think I'd been here once about 20 years ago. There is some pretty interesting history here. There's not a lot to be found on the ground in terms of plaques or information. There's no museum here. But I do hope that this video will show some of you here, those especially who live in Jimboomba, what a unique and fascinating history you have here. Alright, better get going. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. A lot of my viewers do watch my videos, but they're not currently subscribed. So it would really mean a lot if you'd hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you again on my next adventure. Oh, and one more thing. If anybody knows where the Norfolk Hotel used to be here in Jimboomba, please let me know. It's driving me crazy. It was a real hotel, 1875. I can't find it anywhere. Ta.